Welcome back. The Florida legislature was on final approach to landing when everything changed. Parkland on Valentine's Day, just as legislators were preparing to wrap up their annual session with a state budget still to be approved, a crazed gunman opened fire on the high school in Parkland, killing 14 students and 3 employees. Surviving students got on buses, went to Tallahassee and demanded action. They got it. But is it enough? Or does it go too far? And joining us for more is the newest member of the Florida legislature, Democrat Margaret Good, who was sworn into office the very day of the shooting. State Representative Joe Gruters and Zach Anderson, who covered the legislative session for the Herald Tribune. Thank you all for joining us. What's really interesting about the gun bill, it is the first piece of gun control legislation, I believe, in 30 years. And the Republican voted for it, and the Democrat voted against it. Margaret, I know it was a very tough decision for you. Why did you vote against it?
Well, you know, this legislative session saw some of the best democracy in action that we have seen in 20 years. I mean, the students that showed up, that marched and rallied at the Capitol was really moving and really meant a lot to my decision. And I think at the end of the day, when you look at the bill, we're arming teachers, we're moving the age up from 18 to 21 for assault weapons, but there's still the big loophole. If you buy from a private seller, if you buy from a gun show, you can still purchase and possess an assault weapon. And so, we're not doing what Floridians actually wanted. 96% of Floridians want universal background checks to make sure that everyone that purchases a gun in Florida has a background check. Yet I brought an amendment to the gun bill that was defeated on party lines.
So, Joe, there is that, but there is also the fact that the NRA is not too happy with this bill and is suing the state of Florida. Are you concerned about your A rating with the NRA?
Yeah, there's no question, and like Margaret said, this was a very touching issue, having these students come up, having the parents. I actually got a chance to meet with the parents, a couple of them, and talk about the tragedy that they experienced, and it's a very tough vote, you know, and I based my decision, and listen, this really ripped both sides, the Republicans and Democrats, apart within the internal party structures, because you're right. As a Republican, all you got to do is go look at my Facebook page and people will say, I'm for gun control, I'm against Second Amendment, which is not the case. I'm a strong believer of the Second Amendment. I would never vote to ban any guns, but what we have to do is we had to start the discussion. These parents came up, all 17 families wanted something done. They wanted this bill to pass, and what we did with this bill, we're providing $400 million for school hardening, school resource officers, mental health counseling, and I think if this bill was in place 5 years ago, we may have prevented this tragedy. And so for me, no bill is going to be perfect, right? But I would take 95% of a good bill along with 5% that I don't necessarily agree with and move it forward, because we have to do something, and not doing anything would have been devastating for Florida.
Alan, if I may, I agree that this funding, this $400 million that's going to school hardening and public safety and mental health is exactly what we should be doing, and we should have done that 5 years ago. The problem is that the legislature tied this funding to provisions that were untenable, like arming teachers.
Okay. But here's the deal. But you voted against the $400 million, and here's the deal. That's where you have to have compromise. That's what people want from elected officials. 30 years it's taken to have any type of gun control legislation passed, because it's not going to pass in a Republican-dominated legislature. You have to come together and have to accept. Because on the NRA side, it's not good for me.
I just want to say, how can it be compromised when there's been 20 years?
So Zach, is this basically
not talking about the issue?
Is this emblematic of really the debate between Republicans and Democrats across party aisle?
Yeah, you're seeing it play out right here at your desk. This was one of the most fascinating debates that I've ever seen in the state legislature, and I've been covering it for almost 10 years now. You really don't see major issues like this where you have bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition. It was an incredibly emotional issue. It was something that was a hard vote for people on both sides. It's rare to see something like this where you have, you know, something that really appeals to people on the left and something on the right paired up in one bill, so that it really made it a difficult decision for a lot of lawmakers.
We have a lot to talk about. We're going to continue with this discussion. We're just getting warmed up, and we'll have much more on the 2018 legislative session right after we check the first alert weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about the end of the 2018 Florida legislative session, and joining us for more is the newest member of the Florida legislature, Democrat Margaret Good, State Representative Joe Gruters, and Zach Anderson, who covered the legislative session for the Herald Tribune. Let's continue on with the gun issue for a little bit, because what was interesting when you had the teenagers come up from Parkland and their parents, Margaret, not all of them were in favor of banning assault weapons or necessarily raising the age, because they come from the other political perspective on that. So this was not a gimme in terms of taking what the folks from Parkland were hoping for into consideration.
Well, and I thought seriously and listened closely to what the students and the parents from Parkland said, but I also held a town hall in Sarasota the Saturday after, the 2 Saturdays after the shooting, and heard from my constituents about what they wanted. And then I also looked at the research and the data, and the majority of Floridians want a ban on assault weapons. They want universal background checks. They want to not just make sure that their students in their schools are safe, but that people are safe when they go to the mall, when they go to the movie theater, when they go to church, when they go to concerts. And so when I was thinking about the legislation, I was thinking about all Floridians and what people really wanted to see in gun legislation.
Joe, I know you're in enough trouble with the NRA right now, but what about the Florida polls that show close to 70% of Floridians want assault weapons banned?
Well, I'll say this bill, I'll go back to the bill real quick. You can't go from 0 to 100 with 1 second. You basically have to slow, and what this bill did is this is the first starting block, which hopefully what this bill also did was create a commission to look at all the issues that impacted this, and hopefully a year from now, maybe we could take it even further on all mental health, school funding, but across the board. I'm a father of a public school student, and I have 2 on the way. And for me, this vote was about making sure that all children in Sarasota County schools are safe. And that's probably the biggest thing for everybody. Listen, you want to be able to say, as a parent, I want to be able to drop my kid off and know that they're going to be safe.
Have you talked to Marion Hammer, the lobbyist for the NRA, since the vote?
I have communicated by email.
What has she said to you?
It was a video of the governor of Kentucky talking about the Second Amendment and this issue.
Zach, where are we right now? It's a very interesting situation because Marion Hammer has basically been, there are so many different stories about this, including an incredible piece in the New Yorker about how she rules that legislature with an iron fist, and Republicans who dare cross her pay a steep price.
Yeah, and a big question is how this is going to play out on the campaign trail. If Republicans who voted for this bill find that the NRA is after them and that swings some primaries, you could see people second guessing in the future whether they support any type of gun control going forward. I think the NRA is going to be involved in this election, especially in Republican primaries, going after people who they think were not loyal to them on this issue, and we'll see how much clout they have in some of these elections.
Yeah, on big issues, just real quick, on big issues, we should root for compromise. We should root for moving the needle. We're not always going to get everything we want with every bill, but what we have to do is we have to start the process and we have to start moving the ball down the court.
Well, let me say that 20 years and nary one gun reform, gun control measure had been heard, not even debated in committees. And here we are with, after Las Vegas, after Pulse, after Parkland, finally the students come up, have their voices heard, and we do move the needle. But it was not far enough. And this, what people are calling compromise legislation, ends up putting more guns in more people's hands and ends up making our schools less safe because there are more guns in our schools.
No, that's wrong. The schools will be much safer. You voted against $400 million of school resource officers, school hardening, and making sure that we have the mental health the assets on the ground to deal with it. And basically we're taking the guns away from the crazy people. And that's what the main goal is with the Baker Act and everything else. Listen, yes, no bills have been passed in 20 years, but this was a compromise bill because you got people like me who are 100% behind the Second Amendment to say, yes, I am willing to give up some of these items for the greater good to make sure our children are safe. I think a no vote was the wrong way to go. And I think and I think what this bill is going to do for the future, it's going to save lives.
Margaret?
I just want to note that I voted for the $400 million of school hardening, of mental health funding when I voted for the budget. I believe in that.
All right, let's get to a couple of other things, and one issue is the USF consolidation. That USF Sarasota Manatee and USF St. Pete are going to be consolidated into USF Tampa. Zach, it's a really controversial thing because legislators down here work so hard to get those campuses independent and have their own identity. I know that a lot of the members of the faculty have been really concerned what that means to them. Why did this happen?
It's kind of a complicated issue, and it's not an issue that I'm sure many people from the public really understand or necessarily care about all that much, but it is something that could have significant consequences for that campus and for the community going forward. You know, back 17 years ago, John McKay, who was a former senator from Bradenton and became Senate president, he looked at that campus and he said, I think this could be a lot better than what it is right now. I don't think the state is investing in it. And there were some lawmakers up in St. Petersburg who said the same thing about the USF campus in St. Petersburg. And there was an effort to kind of divorce them from the USF system a little bit and get them some independence so that they would be able to grow and make decisions independent of the main campus, which people thought was stifling growth and, you know, kind of being able to do some new and innovative things on those campuses. And now we get to a point where USF Tampa never really liked that move. They had kind of a power play this session to reconsolidate them under one wing of the main campus.
So, Joe, do you have any concerns? Those concerns from 17 years ago could reemerge if basically USF Sarasota Manatee becomes almost a stepchild to the main campus in Tampa?
You know, as the only alumni of the USF Sarasota Manatee campus in the legislature, I will say that obviously I'm very concerned long-term with its future success. It did a lot for me when I was going back to school. But what I will tell you is with higher education has changed over the last 10 years, certainly over the last 17 years. We now have preeminent universities here in Florida. USF will probably become a preeminent university here in Florida over the next probably year or two. And basically Sarasota being a part of that, I think we'll be able to see more funding. It will have more opportunities for students, and I think it will be good for I don't think we'll lose anything that we have at the local campus. I'm going to continue to go up there and do everything I can to fight for our local community school, and only time will tell. If it doesn't work, then in a couple years, when Margaret and I have the power, we could flip it back.
Morgan, let me get your take on that, because as I said, I talked to a lot of faculty members there who are concerned what it means for tenure in terms of the money and resources that they have now.
Yeah, so this was an issue that came up right before the legislative session and really didn't have an opportunity to be vetted. And I know that there were a lot of stakeholders on all sides that would have liked the opportunity to sit down before a decision was made and talk about what it would look like, how it would go. And I really wish that would have happened. I'm hopeful moving forward that the three universities, USF and the two branch campuses, will be able to work together. And I believe the legislation has some of those components in place to make sure that there's good processes in place. But ultimately, I share a lot of those concerns and would have liked to have seen a study before a decision was made.
Okay, we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. Let's try to get two subjects in 4 minutes, I'm sorry. The first one would be texting while driving. For the life of me, we all hate it. Why was it impossible this time around to do something about it, Joe?
Well, I was a co-sponsor of this legislation. I think it's important, but I think at the end of the day, in 5 years, we may not have been talking about texting and driving. If you've gotten to any new car, basically your phone hooks up, it will read your text for you, and I think it's going to be a non-issue in a couple years, but I think it's important to prevent distracted drivers from driving. There's too many accidents, and I think it's a great bill.
And the politics of it, Margaret, I understand in the Senate the problem was liberal Democrats and libertarian Republicans who don't want to tell drivers what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I support the legislation, but I think there was some concern, especially from members of the Black Caucus, that were worried about discrimination being pulled over because this would make texting while driving a primary offense. It's already a secondary offense, so you can get in trouble for texting while driving already. But I think there was some concern about that being the reason to getting pulled over.
Is it possible in the Senate to do something about that?
If you talk to members of the public, they think this is a no-brainer. They can't believe that texting while driving isn't already banned. So I think that it's going to happen eventually. It was a big milestone that it passed the House to make it a primary offense instead of a secondary offense. It'll probably pass the Senate eventually.
Okay, opioid. It limits the number of days of medication that a doctor can prescribe. We recently did a whole hour on this here, and I'm wondering how it plays out, because you have physicians, pain management clinics around here who deal with a lot of patients in a lot of pain. And is this something that is really going to, does it go too far? Does it do enough, Joe?
I think most of the doctors we talked to said it is 3 days, but you can get up to 7 days under certain circumstances. I will tell you that we've hit this issue from all different sides, and you know who really deserves most of the credit across the state is Jim Boyd. I mean, he's the state representative of Manatee, where Manatee we're being hit hardest, and he has really tackled this issue and really gone after it, and we've really attacked it on so many different levels that I do think we're going to start seeing a major decrease and reduction in deaths and cells and everything else over the coming years.
All right, Margaret, let me get you on one other thing. The budget in general, the tax holidays, is that enough? Do you like what you see there?
In general, I thought there were a lot of good things in the budget. There's $101 million for Florida Forever, which is a major win for environmental preservation, although pursuant to the constitutional amendment, it should be much more. There was decent tax holidays for hurricane preparedness, for back to school. And I think the main chunk of the budget is that I disagree with would be Hope Scholarships, voucher programs, and giving money to for-profit charter schools.
And Zach, it seems that those things were crammed in at the last minute because of the gun debate. There was just not a lot of debate about those Hope Scholarships.
Yeah, there was a lot of big issues this session that really got overshadowed by the gun debate, and probably rightly so. This was a big, important issue, and the legislature felt compelled to tackle it, but there were some important things, the continuing to expand the school choice by giving vouchers to go to private schools. That's controversial in some circles. There was other big issues, like we talked about the opioids and things like that. So there was plenty of stuff that happened this session.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, but I believe you're all going to find the following interesting. Before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about last night's show on Republican women voting Democrat. In the House 72 special election here in Sarasota, many Republican women voted for the Democrat who just happens to be Margaret Good, who is sitting here right now. There were Republican women voting Democrat in Miami in another special election, and in the U.S. Senate race in Alabama, where Democrat Doug Jones earned the votes of a lot of Republican women when he defeated Republican Roy Moore. We went to Facebook and asked if this was a result of President Trump. And here is what some of you have to say. Joanne says, of course, it's because of Trump, and we're coming in 2018 and 2020. But Michelle says, not at all. Some of us love the job Trump is doing. Hashtag Trump 2020. And then there's Ann, who says, it's called making up your mind independently of party affiliation. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired, just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. The newest member of the Florida Legislature, Democrat Margaret Good, State Representative Joe Gruters, and Zach Anderson, who covered the legislative session for the Herald Tribune.